New technology can lead to opportunity and prosperity, but also investment risk. Think of the dot-com bubble of the 2000s or the recent crypto bubble. Now with the current AI frenzy, it begs the question, is history doomed to repeat itself? Could another bubble burst be on the horizon? We're going to break it all down for you right now on UBS Trending. Alejo, thanks for joining me in here today. Normally we have you sitting here talking about emerging markets, but today we're going to talk about financial bubbles. And for those viewers out there who may not remember, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was what they call the dot-com bubble. I started out in the industry at around that time, so I watched it grow and I watched it fall. So it's not a new phenomenon. But so where are we today as far as bubbles and financial bubbles, and what's the history that you see there?
Definitely. I'm fascinated by the topic of bubbles. These phenomena are incredibly hard to define concretely, but by and large, we're talking about a situation in which the price of a financial asset is much, much larger than any measure of underlying fundamentals. And as you said, these are not new. They're constant throughout history. The first recorded bubble dates back from the 17th century. We're talking about the Netherlands, the famous Dutch tulips. Back then, you had a situation in which the price of tulips grew spectacularly, only to collapse a few months after. Back then, at the peak of the bubble, you could buy one tulip for the price of a mansion in Amsterdam. That's how crazy things got back then. And as you highlighted, over the last 25 years, we had our fair share of excesses and exuberance in a number of markets. .com around the year 2000, real estate in the United States around the year 2008, and most recently, people might remember crypto back in 2017 are some of the examples. As we speak, we are in a rally in global and US stocks linked to artificial intelligence. People are asking, are we once again in a bubble or not?
Yeah, that is the question. And I've certainly asked this question of people like yourself who have been in the studio with me in different conversations, especially related to what's happening in tech and the performance we've seen in the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, which are both, right as we sit here, near record high levels. They just continue to make new highs every day. But generally speaking, you could sort of see when a bubble might be approaching. So, and I don't mean a bubble that's about to burst, but you see this rise. There is this incredible demand for a good or a service, and the prices are going higher, but the bubble then happens when the price exceeds the value of what it really is, that store of value that the product actually has. Like a tulip for a mansion seems ludicrous, but it happens. So can we find ways to identify these more specifically before the burst happens?
Absolutely. Once again, once the bubble bursts, it's easy to say, hey, we were in the presence of a bubble. Ex ante, ahead of time, is much more complicated. But there are some patterns of history that tend to help identify bubbles. Number one, you're in an environment in which valuations are very, very high of whichever asset you're talking about. Number two, you're in the presence of pretty prevalent use of leverage, a lot of debt used to buy these assets. You're in a situation in which you've got new players entering the market, people who never bought stocks, never bought tulips. All of a sudden, they want to buy stocks, they want to buy tulips. In addition, it's typical to see a behavior in which people are buying an asset, not because they think it's worth something from a fundamental perspective, but with the only goal of selling it tomorrow to somebody else at a higher price. Right. You're a shift from buy and hold to flipping, in a way, a prevalent shift from buy and hold to flipping. By and large, we're talking about euphoria dominating the market, and bubbles have historically also been correlated with the availability of money. Think about situations in which money is easy, interest rates are low. This tends to inflate bubbles. Situations in which money is a little tighter, interest rates are high, this tends to pop or deflate bubbles. These are some of the patterns that you observe in history.
Yeah. We were just talking before we started today that I've read a few different opinions on this matter. There are some market strategists out there and even some academic scholars on probably teaching economics courses at colleges that say it's starting to look very familiar and similar to what happened in 1999 and 2000. So the question that I ask of you then is, do you think that we are in a bubble right now on the equity markets being led by tech, which of course is being led by this artificial intelligence frenzy that we talk about?
The short answer is no.
Okay.
As we speak right now, I don't think we are in a full-fledged bubble. There's some indication of certain frothiness in parts of the market, but I think we're far from a situation of a real concrete bubble for a number of reasons. We talked about valuations. Valuations are high, but today they're not excessive. They're in good part justified by the fundamental disruption of artificial intelligence. We talked about the use of leverage. There's some use of leverage, but it's responsible as we speak. It's not widespread and prevalent. We discussed people buying an asset with the only goal of maybe selling it to somebody else in the future. I think today investors are buying because they believe in the technology and they want to hold on to that investment. There's also not a lot of new participants coming into the market. When the day comes, when you're in a cab drive, right, and the cab driver starts pitching you AI stocks, you get a haircut, and you start getting investment advice from your barber. That is an indication of a bubble, right?
That's true. I'm sure everybody can relate to that when they think back at the crypto a few years ago when every single person, including your bartender, was like, hey, are you investing in Bitcoin or this one or that one? So you knew, okay, wow, this is getting dangerously close to a burst.
That's exactly what I'm talking about,
It's
right?
so true.
So I think there's optimism, but there's no euphoria, right? In addition, think about the Federal Reserve and the availability of money. Right now, interest rates are pretty high. Money is relatively tight. So I think there's not a lot of air that can be pumped into this bubble. Things might change, right? And you got to continually monitor the situation, but there's some frothiness, there's some excess optimism, but no bubble as we speak, I don't think.
And you make a really good point. You know, you kind of mentioned new companies entering the market. When you think back to the 2000 era, right before that, it seemed like we had a different IPO for a new startup company every single day. And a lot of these companies were just appearing out of nowhere with no track record of success leading to that IPO, and companies were just banking on, you know, taking these deals from an investment banking perspective and saying, sure, let's make up a market cap. So there was nothing fundamental there. And we were, by the way, in very low interest rates at that time as well. So there are some definitely stark differences there.
That's another excellent indicator. Back then, whichever company out there that added to its name a .com denomination, it blew up in valuations, right? I don't think we're there yet when it comes to AI. There's some early indications, but you know, it's shades of gray, and we might be in the early innings if it develops at all.
So what should investors be mindful of here at these levels? Because as you just said, very plainly, you don't think we're in that phase of being, like that we have to be fearful of a burst at this point. But what should investors be aware of? What are some of the possible scenarios that we should be looking out for in case down the road there is some kind of more indication that maybe it is a bubble that's about to kind of burst a little bit?
I think, first off, they got to remember that this is a real, concrete, disruptive opportunity. AI is changing the way we work, changing the way we play, and as an investor, you simply cannot afford not to invest in artificial intelligence. At the same time, you got to look at the patterns of history. Remember that whenever there's a new technology, a sexy concept out there, this can be bubble prone. And although we might not be in a bubble right as we speak, this can change quite quickly. So as a matter of what's next, be invested, but be mindful of changes and be ready to pare back if the situation evolves in a way that starts to be a bit more frothy.
Good stuff, Alejo. Thanks very much. Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, you know, there are always a lot of decisions to be made in any investment portfolio. So, you know, always we tell people, make sure you're talking to a financial advisor. He or she will know what your risk profile is and if you should be investing in something that might be considered more risky or not. And so certainly there's that part to play when it comes to managing a portfolio. So
And
good
your
stuff.
barber is unlikely to be the best financial advisor.
Here. Or the cab driver or anybody else who just is not you sitting here talking to me after doing extensive research. But thanks, Alejo. Great to see you as always.
Thank you.
Alejo Joanco from the Chief Investment Office. And thank you for joining us. I'm sure you got a lot out of this conversation, and there's more to come where that is. So you can go visit our website for all the content coming out of our Chief Investment Office at ubs.com/views. Plus, make sure to follow UBS on all of the social media channels, including Instagram. Follow us at UBS Trending. It's right there on your screen. And again, please, if you have any questions or you want to continue this conversation, make sure you're talking with your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. Have a great day, everybody. Remember to keep your eyes on what's trending. See you soon.